Hello again. The National Trust is worried. It seems that 99% of people who go walking in the countryside or visiting Britain's national parks are white. It does not occur to the National Trust, of course, that black people and those of Asian ancestry simply prefer to stay in cities and towns and do not see the point of rambling aimlessly around the countryside. And so they're training people from ethnic minorities to become what they describe as qualified walk leaders, so that they are able to lead pioneering groups of black people and Muslims into the British countryside to overcome what they describe as barriers to access. What those barriers might be, I have not the faintest idea. If I wish to climb a mountain, walk in a forest, go to the countryside, I simply go out and do so, and I cannot imagine who or what might try and hinder me. In the description to this video, I give a link to a news item about this interesting initiative. Mind you, when I say they are training members of the ethnic minorities, that's not in fact what the National Trust say. They describe them rather as the global majority. This is a relatively new scam and a way to suggest that the majority of the people in the world are black, which is of course quite absurd. Talking of the global majority in this way is designed to counter the concept of black people being in any sense a minority. How can they be when most of the people in the world are not white? The reasoning goes, from a global perspective, it is white people who constitute the minority. This is neatly done because, of course, it is very fashionable these days for us all to think of ourselves as global citizens rather than being bound to the parochial outlook of this or that nation. So if black people are actually in the majority worldwide, how can it be fair to describe them as any kind of minority? Of course, this all depends on how you divide up humanity and into which categories you place people. The world's population ranges from those with very pale skins who are definitely white, in Northern Europe say, all the way through to those in West Africa who are very dark indeed. If we assume that white people are those who live in or have their ancestral origins in Europe, then there are perhaps 750 million white people in the world, which is just over 11% of humanity. Apart from Europe, they're distributed among other geographical locations in Canada, the United States and Australia. There is no doubt at all that these folk are in a minority viewed from that perspective. What about black people, though? Those who live in sub-Saharan Africa or whose ancestry lies there. How many of them are there? It is now that matters become interesting and the concept of the global majority rapidly falls apart. There are roughly 1.2 billion people in Africa. Not all of them are black, of course. Egypt alone contains 109 million Arabs. In total, there are perhaps 220 million Arabs, Berbers and white people living in Africa, which means there are something in the region of 980 million black people on the continent. Another 43 million black people live in the Caribbean, perhaps 15 million in Brazil, and of course there are some 40 million African Americans. Then there are 500,000 or so Aborigines in Australia. All told, there are probably about 1.1 billion black people on Earth. Of course, the total human population is now around 8 billion, which means that black people only make up 1/7 of the people in the world. Putting it another way, 6/7 of the global population is not black. There can be no doubt, in fact, that black people are a minority, whether looked at in terms of the populations of Britain or the United States, or even from a global perspective. We can see from the above that the concept of the global majority is hopelessly flawed and is no more than a measure of whatever you set out to prove. If you wish to show that white people do not belong to the global majority, that's easy to do. Reverse the process and it's just as easy to demonstrate that it is actually black people who are not part of the global majority. We can do exactly the same with Chinese people, who make up less than a fifth of the world's population. Who would ever have guessed that the Chinese are not part of the global majority? The National Trust are these days early adopters of any fashionable nonsense when it comes to ethnicity and race, and so we shouldn't really be surprised that they are taking this line. Whenever you see the expression global majority, it's important to remember that it's a scam, a thoroughly dishonest piece of propaganda designed with the specific aim of throwing sand in our eyes and converting us to a particular world view.